Are we? Here we go. Thank you. All right. Can everyone see? Just thumbs up really quick. Weaving Wellness. Awesome. All right. So welcome everyone to this month's member call. I'm Sarah Sterling, Program Catalyst for Commuters.org. I know all of you on this call, so I won't deep dive into an intro about myself, but I'm just so happy to see everyone here, and I'm so excited to have Derick leading this conversation and highly participatory call that we're going to have today, especially on this topic, which I think is really relevant for all of us all the time, but especially now that the year is sort of accelerating towards a close. Can anyone else not believe that it's almost the end of August already? So just a brief intro for those who are watching the recording. Commuters.org, we are a 100% virtual team with team members based all over the world. For example, I am based in Guatemala City, and we can help anyone who is managing a virtual team with any of those logistical challenges, questions that you might have, because we've been a virtual team from the very beginning. But we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in the United States, and we do two levels of work, one of which is our membership community. And this is for members that are impact, purpose first focused, who bring others together into a common space to create some sort of impact. So this could look like an accelerator program working with impact accelerators. This could look like an event organizer that's running an impact focused event. This could be leadership, coaching, training, mentorship type of services. We have a very diverse and global membership community. And then we also do consulting services for large foundations, corporations, and universities. That's more one-on-one guidance and support for your convening needs. So feel free to reach out to me or Colin if you have any questions about that. Some of our upcoming calls that we have for next month is our member call, which is going to be all about selecting the right tools and platforms for your convening. And then also on September 22nd, JV Media is going to be leading us in a conversation about ethical content marketing. So I invite anyone who's on the call today and anyone watching the recording to join us for these calls. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic and stop my screen share to hand it over to Derick Carter from A Human Workplace, who is a fellow member of yours at Commuters.org. And we're just so excited to have him leading us in this discussion today.
Hi, everyone. So grateful to have a chance to be here today and share with you a little bit about my experiences weaving wellness in organizations, and interested to hear about everyone else's experiences as well, because I know we all have them. Just a little bit about me. I started the first part of my career as a consultant, working with different organizations, government, nonprofits, as well as just different industries, telecom, finance, and so forth. Really just focusing on operations. And my golden goose, so to speak, was like this idea of this: what if what if an organization runs smoothly, right? Like all the process runs smoothly, the service delivery and everything. And so that was kind of like what I was kind of chasing as a dream there, and started my own consulting firm doing that. And somewhere along the line, like in doing that work, I realized that this question, like how to look like they will never get there, was kind of coming into my mind. It'll never happen. Partly because my experiences are multiplied, and just seeing how things got interrupted, this pattern of interruption, things start to get smooth, things start happening, no matter how big the organization was or how small. It just seemed like these things would happen. Um, I then kind of left that world and started exploring my own. Uh, I didn't know it at the time, but it was just like physical wellness that moved into like more deeper sense of well-being. That led me into applying those things that I've learned with individuals, groups, and now the organizations. And so the question that I hold these days is like, well, what would it look like if an organization really prioritize well-being, not just for themselves, but for their employees, for the communities, for people that they provide services for, et cetera, for the earth? How would that look like, and what would it take to get there? And so I know we're talking about weaving wellness into organizations today, but I think there's a link there. You'll see as we talk here, the way my mind works. I see patterns and interrelationships with everything. And so it's not always linear. So it's not always conducive for business conversations, but hopefully for at least interesting conversation today. So that's about me. And I would ask, because I don't know everyone and I don't know your background, I would love to hear like your background and like what you would like to, I guess, get out of today's conversation so we can weave that into today's topics. I'm happy to call someone, but if you feel moved to jump in, that's welcome too. Jessica, would you mind?
Sure, happy to. Great to meet you, Derek.
Likewise.
I very much resonate with your story. I've also worked for some time in operations and supporting organizations go from a mess of ideas in their heads to more professional systems and things like that. And over the years have also found myself connected to well-being, in particular leadership in integrative healthcare. And so have supported a number of organizations and also supported investors and philanthropists and really thinking about well-being at the foundation of what they do, and to be successful. And so I have spent some time working at JumpScale and at Tonic. I was once on the board of conveners.org, which was such a pleasure. And I am now a consultant for a variety of organizations, bringing together investors and philanthropists, and also supporting social entrepreneurs with well-being at the foundation of what they do. So I am so eager to learn more about your thoughts and your experiences and learn together.
Likewise. It's awesome.
I guess I can go next. My name's Kenny Andrzejewski. It's wonderful to meet you, Derek. I go on my other monitor. There we go. Here we are. I do my work primarily through my organization, Why Here Matters. And I focus primarily on community building, and that's working with a lot of early stage organizations and initiatives, and even a lot of place-based communities to help them use pilot and iterate on different programs that increase belonging and social cohesion and just the social fabric that we so desperately need to be improved and invested in. And I work on a national scale and I work on a local level. I'm based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, originally from the Midwest, but have a deep affinity for the South and doing work down here. I think that's me.
Thanks, Kenny. I really appreciate the community builder aspect of this because I think that's a huge piece, and I want to dig deeper into that as we move to the conversation. Sarah, Colin, I know you both, and everyone knows you, but just in terms of this conversation, weaving wellness into organization, I'd love to hear your.
Who's going first, Sarah?
Yeah, you can go, Colin. I'll go last.
My name's Colin. So I am an events assistant with conveners.org. I do work with a number of different organizations. Most of my work is in the realm of virtual assistance with a particular focus towards events. One of the things that I think since, switching from a full-time job last year to freelance-based work with a number of clients is you see differences in what wellness means to different organizations. And I think, there's a lot of cohesion between organizations on how they handle lots of different areas of business. But there's a lot of disconnect between what wellness means to people. And I think it's something that deserves a lot more dedicated attention a lot of the time. So I'm just excited to kind of hear from Derick. And, I've heard you speak on similar topics a couple of times. So I'm just looking forward to hearing everybody else's experiences as well.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Colin. So again, I'm Sarah. I know all of you. I've been working with conveners for the past 4 years, and then I also have a part-time job working with SOCAP as a part-time consultant running their social entrepreneur program, and I've been working with them for the past 7 years. And I think similar to what Colin said, it's really interesting to see in the different jobs that I've held the difference between organizations and their priority on health. And I think too, the distinction between what's on paper and what the actual organizational culture looks like, especially from leadership. And I think that leaders, especially founders and executive level position holders, sometimes don't understand the power that they hold just by the way that they model their own work-life balance and wellness in the organization for others. And so I think I have learned the hard way to how to really set very strict, some people would say very strict boundaries between work and life, and when I'm in office and when I'm not available. Especially because, I'm a working mom. Jess knows this. We share that in common. And working from home and having a home office and working virtually, you really need to be able to know how to hold those boundaries, because otherwise everything gets dismantled, especially when you have a little toddler running around who won't let you work sometimes. So, and trying to find space and trying to find those colleagues and work environment that will be really flexible and attuned to that as well. I think especially working at an organization like Conveners, where everyone else is a single digital nomad, it's very different experience versus SoCap, which is very like, we have a lot of older folks with established families and established lives, like very grounded. And so it's really interesting to work in those both of those spaces and see how wellness plays a factor in both worlds in different ways, both positive and maybe not so positive, but and working with very driven people who are very passionate about the work that they do. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for naming the parent situation. I'm in that situation too. Although I think, mothers have it much more tougher, so I don't want to compare, but I appreciate that. Yeah, and so everything you all said just kind of rings true to my own experience too, and talking and working with different organizations. Couple of things. I was thinking of framing the conversation today a couple different ways. One, if everyone's okay, I know we were talking about weaving wellness, but the idea of well-being to me is more holistic. And also, I think one of the gaps I find in trying to transfer this to organizations, I think, Colin, you were talking about this. Everyone has their own definitions of like wellness and well-being, right? And they break it down in different dimensions and so forth, and they're all great. But they're also very conceptual, I find. And when I talk and work with individuals, like well-being is the feeling of being well, right? And there's feelings associated with that. And sometimes I find like in organizations, like there's an education that needs to happen, not just awareness, but like felt sense of well-being, right? Like if sometimes we walk into a place, I'm just using the word dentist office, and you feel like very welcome. Like the receptionist is welcome, the dentist is welcome. Everyone's like, you're like, oh, I'm going to the dentist, and it's not so bad because people there you know, are open and free, right? And you can tell when it's genuine and it's not genuine too, right? Like it's like I'm putting on my professional face and not. And there's times when that's disjointed, similar to what you were saying, Sarah. Was like, okay, like over the phone experience versus like in-person experience, like there's a disconnect. I'm not feeling that same type of feeling. And so if we're okay, if everyone's okay with it, I like to kind of use the word well-being, the holistic nature, and also just terms of just starting to name like the positive feelings associated with that. Is everyone just thumbs up? Okay, cool. Um, the other part too, I thought about talking about weaving in three different layers: individual, team, and organization. Um, and I'm feeling inclined to start with individual. I know that there's been conversations about that already, but I find like that's so key. And to your point, Sarah, about like leadership and founders, like that sense of individual well-being being transferred to the people around us, if that's not there, especially at those higher levels, then that just impedes the weaving process. And so I'm thinking maybe we'll do 3 rounds. The first round, we can just talk about individual weaving and our own experiences with that. And if you don't mind, I'll kick it off just to provide a frame of reference, but feel free to go everywhere. And Colin, if I can lean on you perhaps to be a timekeeper, because I know these topics are juicy, and so we're probably going to want to stay in those kind of topics for a little while. I'm thinking, let's see how many people we have here. 5, so that would be 10, maybe 2 to 3 minutes each for the first round, and then we'll pare it down as we go. Is that cool? So individual well-being, and that's where I kind of started. I think this is very important, especially for people that's doing very purposeful work, because we want our work to get out there so bad, so much that sometimes we neglect our own sense of well-being, um, and the effort in trying to do more good in the world, right? And when I worked with athletes, I always talked about like there's a physical idea of rest, right? Like we need to rest, recuperate to kind of do some more. But there's a sense of like deeper rest or a deeper sense of well-being, and that's coming to light, I think, more and more in this era. Maybe potentially because of COVID being part of that, but also I think it's just part of people's more awareness that um, this deeper sense of well-being. If we don't have that, then we're unable to perform at our best, right? So I think of um, Simone, I'm going to mess up her name, Simone Biles, the gymnastic. I'm thinking of the Japanese American Haitian tennis star. She escapes me right now. My wife's a big fan of hers. But those are just kind of stuff that kind of are resonating with me, where people are being more okay, saying, "Hey, like I don't feel okay, and it's affecting me," right? And these are people at the highest of high levels saying that. And I think within organizations we have that as well. And so strengthening our own individual sense of well-being, and for me, that what that means for me, my path is more like the heart-centered well-being. It's this positive feeling that I can feel all the time. I don't feel all the time because sometimes I get caught up just like everyone else. But when I'm in it, I feel a sense of peace, calmness, happiness, and that resonates around me, just like it resonates for everyone else. When we're around positive people who feel that, and that transfers, right? Like that sense of peace transfers. And what I find is that when you start there, when people are grounded in their own well-being, prioritize their own well-being, um, they make different decisions. They show up differently. They also tend to have more awareness about other people well-being around them and care about other people well-being just naturally, right? I was in a meeting the other day, and the team was going through some struggle, and one of the ladies was like I really don't want to put any more work on people because I know people are struggling right now, right? I don't feel comfortable like doing more programs this next season because I know the impact it's going to have through all these other. So this type of natural like system leadership, system awareness starts to come through, and is felt by other people, and it attracts other people too, right? Like people like, oh, that person cares, right? Not only for the work, but also like my experience with the work where I'm at. So I'm gonna pause there. I don't know how that was on time, but I feel like close. So
You were only 8 seconds over, so we're good.
okay, perfect. So that's been kind of my ahas, I guess, in that piece, and I'll pass it over to whoever wants to come next.
Can you restate the framing again, Derek, just so I have it right?
Yeah, so just individual, team, and organization, weaving well-being.
I can jump in. So I appreciate that framing, and it coincides with a lot of the thinking that I think I've been both studying and implementing into different work that I do as well. And I think beyond those 3 tiers, also into partnerships and ecosystems as well, and the well-being that's connected to those as well. And starting with individuals, I also agree, and I think it is important for us to have self-awareness as leaders, as folks that we're working with, those individual leaders as well. And I just to be additive to the conversation, because I agree with everything you said, just to be additive to the conversation. I also had a colleague kind of challenge me in this conversation. And so I'll name Alexis Bunton as one of my colleagues who has taken, who has
more of an Indigenous background and has thought about how some of the elders have talked to her about how it to be and so I'm not going to capture everything perfectly. So Alexis, if Alexis is ever listening to this, apologies that I'm not getting it perfect. But what I took away from it, I'll frame in that way, is that it is tricky to only focus on the individual because we're just a part of something so much larger. And so to start there is to be kind of having so many blind spots to all the things in the ecosystems that we're a part of. And so I just thought that was an interesting framing of things, because I think depending on what culture you're coming from, depending on what organization you're working with, what kind of team members you're working with, that idea of starting with the individual might not land well with every single organization you work with. And so that's just one thing I wanted to add to the conversation.
No, thank you for that. Totally agree too, by the way. It's not a linear thing, but it's hard to transfer that over to.
I think I'll contribute and build. Hopefully, a few thoughts are coming to mind. They've been swirling as we've entered this conversation. One is on the individual level. I definitely reinforce the self-awareness and kind of understanding how oneself is affected in the work and in the world. I think I have an interesting challenge that comes up for me very often, where I have a hypervigilance around myself, and I sometimes will extend that to others. And so I have a tendency to problematize in team settings where things that might just need the natural course of sitting with it. I'll be like, is that an issue we need to address for a team member or for the stakeholder that we're engaging? And that's something I've learned to soften around, and just to make sure that we're seeing the big picture in terms of the environment we're creating for others, and acknowledging that we're all on our own journey, and just supporting each other in that journey rather than trying to solve or interject ourselves in that journey. And that's because I'm always working on this level where the ecosystem and the partnerships are ever present in the organization and the team. One other thing, and this is where I really wanted to build, but I lost my train of thought. I'll stop right there. If it comes back to me, I'll bring it up. But it was off of what you had said, Jessica.
Yeah, I think, again, like Jess said, I agree with everything that's been said. So I kind of want to add to the conversation. And I think to a lens that I use, because I hear so many times from the founders that I work with in the entrepreneur program, or even just coworkers, about the burnout that happens is, it's really hard when you are working with individuals who are all so passionate about the work that they're doing, and they're working on really almost in crisis mode all the time, because it's well, if I don't work on this 24/7, some lives may be lost. There's very high stakes for a lot of the people that are in, at least my entrepreneur cohort. For conveners, I always say we shouldn't be in crisis mode. We're ecosystem builders. If we take a day off, the world's not going to burn to the ground. But for a lot of the entrepreneurs, I hear that a lot in terms of oh, what is a personal life? I don't remember what that feels like. But I think for me, in the work that I do, in a personal frame that I use, is if I don't pause and take a moment, what will I not be able to do in the future? Maybe even in the immediate future. If I don't take care of myself, then I can't do the work. And the work will become, I don't want to say a chore or tedious, but the work will no longer be fulfilling, because it will feel more like an obligation, and it will lose its joy. And I think that's kind of what we all want, is to have work that really fills our cups. But if we're not also filling our cups personally and individually, I don't think that we can really be present and do the heart-centered work that we're also dedicated towards. Which is why I do hold really strict boundaries to be able to be there with my family, because that fills my cup and is actually the most important thing to me, way beyond my work. So yeah, I'll just add that point.
I think one of the things that I've learned is, which I think kind of ties into Sarah, what you're saying, is being able to recognize just how individual certain aspects of well-being and wellness are, and recognizing that what might be important to one person might not be quite the same as what. So, Sarah and Jessica, you are both working parents. I don't have children. There are going to be things that you're going to need from a wellness perspective that I'm not going to need, and vice versa. So I think not putting too much pressure on saying, okay, well, like this person handles it this way and they're fine, and just being able to recognize that there are going to be differences across different people and that there's nothing wrong with that.
I think I remembered my point earlier. For me, there's as I was originally thinking about it, it's this component of psychological safety as wellness, where I'm thinking of two different clients. One works on a national level, and it's definitely just like this enlightened space that we hold all the time. And like wellness in that space looks like, hey, I'm taking today off to go like on a meditation retreat. But I have a local client, and there was this moment a couple of weeks ago, like we've just started a few months ago. The direct report just got onboarded a month ago, that I'm reporting to, and he's a director level person at this organization. And I was at a retreat for 2 days, and I set an out of office at like 11 o'clock at night the night before, because I was like, oh, we hadn't like discussed this procedure, but I'm going to be like, definitely won't be checking email. And if any of our community stakeholders check in, they should be able to report back to the organization. So I included his email in it. And then the next day he gave me a strongly worded email being like, hey, I'd appreciate you approving that with me. And I was like, in the startup environments that I've been in, like it feels like everyone's just on the same page. Like these are the things we need to do. It's not personal. But in that environment, because it's like a local nonprofit, I could tell that like I had overstepped a boundary there. And like I think the waking up and having that framing of like what are my responsibilities shaken was an aspect of the psychological safety being threatened and the wellness not being observed. And so just seeing those two different kind of realities, and holding that complexity is something I'm reflecting on in this.
Oh, thank you for adding that, Ken. Do you go by Kenny or Ken, by the way?
Kenny.
Kenny, okay. Uh, I love that, and that's I think it's a nice segue. I think everything that you all said is just a nice segue. Um, for me, so I guess I want to talk a little bit about like what you were saying, Jessica, about people have different cultural and background, and for me, I have like three different cultures background that influence me, and so like one of them is very Japanese. I'm always thinking of the collective, and I'm always feeling the collective too. Um, and what you were saying, Kenny, to me as well, and I think Colin, you were saying in your intros, like each different groups have their own needs. Each different collective have their own needs, right? And each configuration may have their own needs. And so, like by us taking care of ourselves, however we take care of ourselves, like Sarah was saying, we're able to tune into other people's needs a little bit clearer, and we're still gonna hit some bumps and bruises and stuff, right? Because no one's perfect, but we're able to take those lessons learned and move them, take them forward. So um, I've loved that, and the other thing is just kind of moving into teams. I feel that naturally as people start to embody well-being, however they do that, um, it starts to come out in their interaction with different people, right? It starts coming in terms of like meeting conversations, how you do your check-ins. Like you can do check-ins as a tactic, right? Checklist, but you can do a check-in as people felt seen and heard too as well. Um, when you have your one-on-ones, the same type of thing. And so what I find a lot of times is that people want to move to like, what are the things? What are the things? I'm like, I can give you all the things. You've heard all the things already. It's not going to be that surprising, but it's really the quality, right? How do you show up? What is the quality of the relationship of yourself with real well-being that you're bringing forward, and how does that resonate with the other folks like in your team? Um, one example comes to mind is like I have one group. They practice embodiment. Like they always ask themselves like if they're doing a new project program, like yeah, how are we going to embody that? What practices are we going to do to help us remind us that this is not just this is not in our heads, but this has to be in our bodies and our hearts too. And I thought it was just a wonderful way to kind of, help ground and anchor, the group as they move forward in their daily activity. So I'll just pause there. Whoever wants to chime in with other thoughts. Free. See a big smile on your face, Jessica. I don't know what that means, but just a big smile.
I had my hand up. You can see a smile behind
Oh,
that.
yeah. Your hair can hide that smile.
Um, where to begin? I think I'm still gathering my thoughts and connecting the dots. So happy for others to chime in first. But maybe I'm smiling just because I resonate with what you said.
Yeah, I love that embodiment component. I definitely agree with like this isn't about the action necessarily. We all know all the things we can do in a lot of ways. What I'm thinking about is in that more established versus startup kind of environment or small team environment where often it feels, or to Sarah's point, where it feels like we're always trying to save the world. When it feels like the diorama that you're in, like the ground is shaking too much, or how does wellness become something you practice is, I think, a challenge for me. Like the embodiment is difficult when you're like nauseous, like when your stomach's a little queasy or you have a headache or it feels out of your control. Like the stress responses and all that too.
I totally get that. And for me, I usually just take that feedback to myself, like, okay, I need to get more grounded, like offline, like when I'm out of there, because it's sometimes hard to do it when you're there. I need to spend some time to be more grounded. I also use that too sometimes personally, just as an inner reflection, right? With the idea that in networks they talk about fractals quite a bit. Some of the different practices and traditions I experienced, it's just like the outside is just a reflection of the inside, and so a lot of times I just take that as just feedback, like, okay, what's in me? um, and I found that just practice being helpful because sometimes you can't control what's going on the outside, right? It's gonna be what it is. And you don't have to reflect on necessarily what I said, but just in general, like your experience with bringing wellness to teams, you know, which I'm sure we all have, and maybe we participated in a team where we felt like this type of flow, like that. To me, that's how it feels, like with an organization and team and everything. And even myself, like when I have a good sense of well-being, there's just a senseless flow.
I had more of a question for everybody in terms of just to learn about the different ways in which you help steward or you've seen others help steward the team dynamics and flow when it comes to well-being. Kind of what Ken was saying in terms of, how do we hold people accountable in a loving way? Because I know I've experienced recently holding personal boundaries and expressing my desire for other team members to be better at holding their personal boundaries, and it was met with a lot of resistance, and there was a lot of friction caused because of my comments, which was coming from a very heart-centered place but wasn't received in a heart-centered way. I think mostly because of it was a very like high stress situation for that individual, but was just causing unintended hurt on both sides, I think. So just wanting to hear and learn about the ways that others have encouraged, especially when they see really either toxic or damaging or just like serious burnout on teams that they've worked with in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting because I am in I have my personal reflections and also client experiences to share on this. In terms of, I was actually knowing I was going into this work that it was an overtime job, and I was a little nervous about it, and I already knew like I had to set my boundaries, like you were talking about, Sarah. And the leadership, and I talked to the leadership, and I'm like, wow, that sounds like a recipe for burnout in any interviews. I was like, that sounds really challenging. And they at that time said, like, we need to change things. I think that's why we want to bring people like you in, is to really change this culture, this kind of mentality. And as we were working, it was just like constantly hitting hard points where it was really challenging to change that culture, and it was met with just a lot of team norms that folks didn't want to change. And so that was one challenge. I didn't come with a role to change the team culture in that specific instance, and so I also had limited power as to what I was able to do with that organization. But just reflecting back on it, I'm reading this book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace. And there was just so many things about taking time off or working in a different location where it was just met with many questions. And I was like, whoa, I've always been very responsible with my own schedule. And now to have somebody like really wanting to know all the details was something that was creating this environment that was unhealthy. So that was one of many examples that created an environment that was not healthy. Yes, thanks, Sarah, for that. And so and for those of you that are into Instagram, there's somebody I follow who is Laura. Well, I'll copy into the chat the handle, because I just think it's hilarious of all the things that I've heard said and how it can be reframed when you're faced with difficult conversations and things that you can say in response to somebody who's saying something that is just feels very toxic. So those are some things that come to mind in these conversations around teams. And also, I've had wonderful experiences where people are more open to changing their team culture and having some of the operational pieces that can certainly help with team culture and creating well-being and all the different realms, I think, of the wheel of health from the Duke Integrative Medicine program. It's a program that I went through, and they talk about different elements from nutrition to your financial well-being and all of everything in between, and how that can be applied into your teams as well.
This question actually makes me think of the question posed there makes me think of like how easy it is for us to misconstrue what's wrong in a dynamic, whether it's interpersonal or structural or cultural. I think a example that is top of mind for me is actually someone that I was dating. She was like a social worker in a direct service setting, and she was complaining about a coworker who would send like 2 a.m. emails, and she's like, "That's stressful. That's like, like, yeah, she has every right to feel the way that she feels." And I had previously worked for like an international company where I'd be like in Japan getting emails from Boulder. And I'm like, okay, well, there's like solutions that are actually pretty like available there. Like, if anyone here ever gets an email from you before 9 a.m. working time, I wrote it the night before. Like, I'll tell you this right now, because I will burn the midnight oil and then just schedule the email to go out the next morning so that it like can work within most people's traditional work processes. I hate that Google Calendar doesn't allow you to schedule invitations. Otherwise, I'd probably be up all night doing work. But like that's a structural example that I think can become interpersonal, where the issue wasn't him and his work style, because that's just when he finds productivity, or maybe he has the other commitments that keep him up. Like for me, I will take a nap in the afternoon and do the work later. Like that's my wellness practice of like, when I'm tired, I'm tired. I'm not gonna like beat my head against a wall. So I think there's a certain diagnosis that can go on about whether it's because I think in a personal example, I've had a coworker over the last year, and like she's the first like direct coworker that I've had like or not the first, but as a report, like I have developed real trust with her in a way that I hadn't with many of my colleagues previously. And that is like a great interpersonal example of wellness, because I know every time I can show up, I'm like, hey, I'm not feeling it today. And she'd be like, that's all right. And that aspect of interpersonal wellness, I think is like crucial for me now. Like if I can't be honest with my colleague, I don't want them to be my colleague, is kind of a sentiment I hold now.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially something that was sparked for me when you were talking, Ken, is like the different perceptions people hold and like the practices they feel they have to implement in order to feel balanced themselves. Like I have had colleagues that love to work on Sundays because they want to get ahead of the work that's coming that week. And for me, that would be like a very toxic work style because I refuse to work on the weekends. Because it's it's family time, it's time to rest and relax and recuperate and hopefully get away from screens. Because I think we all have way too much screen time for our brains. And I think too, as you were saying as well, oh, I'm gonna lose the train of thought. It's going. Yeah, just like the same with the 2 a.m. emails. But for me, I think, and this is again part of like my hard edges that I have that people have told me that I need to soften a little bit, but it's like, you can send me whatever you want whenever you want, but these are my working hours. So don't expect a response. Like if you send me something on the weekend, Slack message or otherwise, great. That's great for you. Like if that's your working style, fine. But like you won't get a response from me until Monday at 8 a.m. So like I think it's always really hard, especially when you have multi-person teams when everyone has different working styles. Like we just had on SoCap, we just had a great conversation about making time to do deep work, because if you're scattered and ping-ponging all over the place all the time, there's not that time to do deep work. And so we discussed like what's an emoji we can use on Slack to indicate when we are in deep work. And it was just a really wonderful conversation to have, because it's like, okay, now like across the entire team that's in multiple time zones with multiple people, if you see someone, a little emoji of a guy or gal with a hard hat on, that means that person is in deep work. So it's just, and it was a very light, fun but important conversation that was just posted by one of the leadership saying, look, I need this time and I'm just letting you all know. And you also don't have to immediately respond to something just because I message you on Slack. Like if you're in deep work as well, take that time. So I thought that was really interesting, an interesting approach.
Colin, anything to add on Teams before we move on to the
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I just think sort of to continue with what Sarah was saying, at least I'm noticing there's new elements of team wellness, at least to me now, with working with more dispersed organizations and dealing with people in different time zones. And it's become something that I've started working in. I guess it kind of goes back to an individual wellness for me, in that it's become part of my process when I'm, communicating with potential clients on asking them questions about, have you worked with people in other time zones before? How dispersed is your team right now? Because I have started with some clients who don't have that sort of understanding that I'm not necessarily working the same hours as you, and I'm not only working with you. So I think sometimes finding people and clients and teams that have that sort of understanding is something new that I'm kind of learning is quite important, and something that definitely has a big impact on both my wellness, but also I think on the team's wellness, because I notice very clear differences in the teams where they're more respectful of that, and teams where they're not as experienced or respectful with regards to working hours and schedules. No, conveners was a good example. I had rose-colored glasses after conveners. I didn't realize what it could be like with others.
looking at time here. So we'll move on to the organizational piece and try to make it brief. So there's a lot I can say on all these different subjects, but on the organizational piece, what comes to me right now to say, and I'm going to go back to what you just referenced. You talked about deep work. Organization needs to make time for deep relationships to form. Right? So teams and groups can become in sync. Uh, we all know that, when teams are in sync, things like a lot of these things that you're talking about, they start to normalize and people find their groove and they just know, right? And some things is like always an outlier, and it's like, okay, that person's always going to be late. That's just how they are, but we work within that. And sometimes you just find flow, right? And once you find flow, but right now, especially with COVID, teams working styles, organization styles, some are moving to remote and hybrid. The rhythm is so off. Like you have to have intentional time so you can have develop quality relationships. And for me, to to develop well-being, like well-being doesn't just happen in an organization. Like it stems for the people involved in the well organizations, right? Just like anything else, people talk about toxic organization, this and that. It's like, yeah, usually you have people in key positions that, and the same thing with well-being. You have people in key positions, not necessarily leadership, but if you have them in the right positions, the well-being can start to grow. And so for me, I hold like a community. I'm calling it a community building strategy, just because that's what I see when I'm in community and so forth. But if you look at, just gathering folks to have interest in well-being in a place where they can explore that, either formal or informal. It could be training, it could just be, internal exploration. Um, you'll see natural clusters come to be. Some people will be more into mindfulness, some people more in this type of this. I mean, there's no right or wrong, right? But you'll see clustering happen. And if this is going into self-organization a little bit more, but with those clustering, if they mature enough, you can start creating structure around that and building structure around that, whether it's circles or something where that could start anchoring this in the organization in different ways. So it's just not relying on these people. They're actually start built into the structures itself. And that's a strategy we use a lot when we do quality management deployment or operation excellence deployment. It's like, because once those people leave, you're right back to where you started. Let's just kind of start built into the structure. So I'll pause there and get other people's thoughts.
I think one thing that I've seen from an organizational level in a lot of organizations is there can often be these sort of perceived barriers of, that won't work for us because, and, we can't do this because, and, we can't implement that because, and as opposed to an openness and willingness to adapt it in a way that it could work. For example, I own a small business here in Canada. It's a small team of 6 people. It's a cafe. We don't have an endless budget for wellness initiatives. But one thing that's always been really important to me, and because the people we hire, like our high school students, university students, I've worked those types of jobs. There's not a whole lot of effort or thought that goes into the wellness of a part-time food service employee a lot of the time. And while I can appreciate that, there's not necessarily the budget to devote to an official program or something. One thing that's been very important to me since we opened the business is creating an environment that I don't expect this to be anyone's career. I don't expect people to want to be here for the next 5 years. But I see no reason why we can't create a positive and welcoming and supportive environment for them while they are. So taking concepts and ideas and programs and things that are typically reserved for larger organizations, and instead of saying, well, we can't pay for that, finding out, in what way could we do it and how can we adapt it to offer it to our team. So I think a little bit more of that thinking would be helpful for some organizations, as opposed to the just kind of ruling it out from the get-go.
I love that, Colin, because I think we can think about that through an impact lens as well, right? There might be various for-profit organizations that have some sort of community giving program that's set on the side, but when profit is low, that's the first thing to go. And if we think about that and well-being as well, that just, it doesn't work. And so then that's why we talk about, or in my work, we often talk about well-being at the foundation of the work. And so if it is impossible for you to get your work done without having well-being of your people, then that might be the first question to figure out, right? So that, because it reflects on the business, it reflects on the services, it reflects on your sales and how people are perceiving the organization as well. And so I think there are a lot of connections to the pushback and having an organization that really is truly embodying what it means to have wellness or integrative healthcare, holistic health as part of the organization in a big way.
And I was thinking something that I was thinking about when you were talking, Jess, was even something as simple as the structure of the workday and allowing people flexibility to manage their own tasks and structure and time, and just honoring the fact that, you know, we have trust on the team and we trust that you're working. We're not going to be checking in on you if you know, and not making people work the 9 to 5 days a week. Like I was part of a talk from a guy that does a lot of productivity analysis, and he's like, really, for like deep work that's going to bring in the most amount of value to your organization, it's like 2 to 3 hours a day. The rest of the time is like checking your email and like updating your calendar and all of these like sort of more busy work tasks. But your brain really only has capacity to really do that deep concentrated work like 2-3 hours a day. And I'm like, and I hear so many people, like the excuses thing, Colin, that you mentioned is like, oh, there's no way, like I can't get my job. I need 60 hours a week to get my job done. And it's a conversation that I've never been able to have with a lot of my colleagues, because it's goes back to like, well, maybe you're not managing your time well. I don't know, because like, and everyone has different things that they're juggling both personally and professionally, and I totally get that. But especially in like the industries that I've worked in, it's like, well, we're not lawyers, you know, trying to get like parole for a death sentence or something, that where you like really need to drive yourself a lot for each of your clients. Like we're, you know, we're either ecosystem builders or we're doing a convening. And yes, there are definitely times with the ebb and flow of work where work's going to be like, it's going to be crunch time. And there's also going to be grace periods. And I think being really honest and transparent about what that looks like for every individual on the team based off of their roles and responsibilities is important. But I think also having hard conversations around, you know, no one's pushing you to work 60 hours a week. Why is this happening? And how can we lighten the load so that no one has to be in that situation? I think it's really important to have as a team. I don't know how the best way is to have that conversation, but I think it's really important to figure it out.
I think to double down on what you're saying, Sarah, like, and place it back in the individual, like, we have interrogated extractive labor practices, and I'm not going to work that extra hour if it isn't going to create benefit or there isn't like a justifiable reason to do so. Like the royal eye, not, you know, however this all works. But I think that's kind of the case we need to make to people. And that's why, you know, I think that's the risk of any wellness initiative, not just the profit motive or within the organizational structure, but like there's endless ideas of what to do, but if we can't justify the labor or time or effort put into it, then it's going to have a failure to launch at this point on multiple levels. Then there's like this great reform is actually part of the healing, part of the benefit. This is wellness. The fact that we would push back against an extractive 40-hour a week kind of model where our time is actually our own and no one, like, moving away from that wage mentality. No one owns our time, kind of thing.
So that brings us almost full circle. Thank you, Kenny, for that. So just parting thoughts. I know we have a minute left. I guess for me, there's a saying like "be the change." Right? Like to me, it's like, well, be well, be the well-being, right? Like for no matter where we are in the organization, where we're at, we can always bring that within ourselves and share that little piece with us. And if we're hiring an organization, then we can maybe affect structure and other aspects. But just yeah, be the light wherever we go.
Thank you, Derick. I don't know if you wanted us to all share, but I thought that was really beautiful wrap up.
Oh, my thought was to have everyone share. I'm sorry. I wanted just parting thoughts from everyone. Yeah, just from the conversation, whoever's percolating there from her.
Yeah, I think just to echo what Jess and Ken have already written in the chat, just sense of gratitude for everyone and being open and trusting with the group that we have here and just sharing of ideas and resources and challenges in weaving in the different layers.
Well, thank you all for joining today. Appreciate it. Delightful conversation. Look forward to being on more calls with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derick.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye.